Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I am your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Controversial Issues with that crazy cool Rabbi Chaim Coffman from the Holy Land. Welcome back. Don't smoke crack, Rabbi. How are you today?
Doing great. Always a pleasure to be here.
Good. So you did follow my advice and don't smoke crack part, right? Just want to make sure that my message is getting through. You know what I'm saying?
Or I had caffeine, you'd all be dead.
Yeah, we definitely do not want you having caffeine. That is no joke.
And you can tell from some of the previous shows where I actually drank caffeine or not.
That's hilarious.
You can tell.
Right. That's funny. Well, today's show is going to be certainly interesting. Of course, they all are, but I mean, this is one I don't think that we've actually covered before. You know, after we keep running into topics that we will hit from other angles, but I don't think we've actually touched on this one yet. By the way, just to let you know ahead of time, your camera, your internet strength might be a little lacking, but we're going to move forward anyway. As long as I've got a good audio, you know, we can handle pixelated images there, I guess, a little bit. So we'll just do our best with what we got. So
okay,
alrighty, okay, Rabbi, take it away. It's all yours.
Okay, pleasure to be here as usual. So we got two topics really to hit, and they're really going to hit them simultaneously. One of them about the mitzvah to have children, or using preventive, medicine or other things not to have children, and then we'll speak about castration, which is going to be a very interesting topic of castrating animals. And even, a person having it done to themselves, whether male or female, right? So we're going to see. We'll see about that. So the Torah tells me, Book of Genesis chapter 9, I think verse 6, verse 11, where it says that God said to Noah, to his sons, he said, as for me, he said, behold, I establish my covenant with you, with your offspring, every living being that is with you, the birds and all that, the birds, the animals, every beast of the land that departed from the ark, every beast of the land, etc. I'm going to confirm my covenant with you. Never again shall flesh be cut off by the waters. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. Right? So the Torah tells me over here, there's a mitzvah. Right? There is a mitzvah to be fruitful and multiply. Now, we're going to see, right? We're going to see how this applies to a Jew, how it applies to a non-Jew, and exactly how relationships work. I mean, we have hit this from another angle, right? But we're going to see it now, I think, in a little bit different context, right? So basically, when we'll speak about Jews, we'll make it easy or make it a little more difficult, depending, right? That you have two Jews, right? A male and a female. They want to get married. So the deep connection of marriage starts after marriage, right? In other words, before they get married, by Orthodox Jews, they don't touch, right? So, that physicality always gets in the way. I will reference when Harry met Sally, right? Go back, way back when, and that's really the theme. It is one of them, that is probably the theme of the movie. Right, which is that, the physicality always gets in the way. And, a male and a female don't just end up being friends, right? It usually goes beyond that. So what's the purpose? What's the purpose of marriage? There's a deep connection. There's a difference between marriage and infatuation. Infatuation is something different. Marriage is something that's lasting, right? It's not just based on looks or money, or other things. But a purpose of marriage is having kids. There's an obligation even for non-Jews. They might be shocked to hear this, but there's an obligation for non-Jews as well. Certainly to have children. There's an obligation to populate the world, right? If you didn't have children in the world, there's no next generation, right? There is no next generation finished, right? No one would be here. So that is why, certainly for Orthodox Jews, any form of touching or anything else is going to be forbidden. Premarital sex, certainly forbidden, right? That has to be that's waited till they get married. That's why, we're going to marry for our kids relatively young, for that reason. And having children, certainly by Jews, what is the concept? It means having a boy and a girl, right? That is, without going on all the details, that is the obligation. right? You have a male, you have a female. Technically, after that, anything else is a bonus, right? Technically you could probably stop there, but there is an issue, which we are going to get to, and that is about contraception. But in general, in the Orthodox community, most people probably aware, or if you're not aware, you'll find out now, that in an Orthodox community, that most families probably have 6-7 kids on average, right? So, what if a woman can't handle it? It's too hard. It's other things. Okay, right? We're going to speak in generalities, certainly, about contraception, but certainly every child a person has, it's not about money, even though people say, wow, I got 6 kids. How am I going to send them to college? It's going to cost millions of dollars. It's pretty miraculous how Jews survive, with food. You have Shabbos, you have holidays, kosher food goes up exponentially when it comes to Passover. Everything's 3 times the price. Tuition, certainly outside the land of Israel, tuition for school, it's like college tuition in general. So, one of the biggest miracles the Satmar Rebbe of blessed memory said was not the 6-day war, right? The 6-day war, okay, in and of itself was miraculous, but he said that wasn't the biggest miracle. What's the biggest miracle? The biggest miracle is how Orthodox Jews marry off their kids, right? That in and of itself, 6-7 kids, whatever, getting them married off. And, before COVID, you would see, a person went to a wedding, all the wedding halls every night are booked. And, people are making weddings. They might be having heart attacks in the process, but people are making weddings, right? It is pretty darn miraculous. So the question is, or one question is, okay, a person has kids. What if they have, a bunch of kids close together? Or what if, it's something the woman can't handle, or, whatever the case is. There are cases where rabbis will allow contraception. Now, obviously, not all contraception. And again, I'm just gonna make some generalities, right? But everyone have to ask their own, local Orthodox rabbi what to do. It's going to depend on a number of factors. One is maybe it's a danger for a woman, to have a child. Let's say a woman has had, has a few kids, and she had these children via C-section, right? She had a C-section. Now, if that area, gets weaker over time. So therefore there has to be a gap, certainly more of a gap than normal in order that she doesn't get pregnant, because, it can be dangerous, having kids so close and always having a C-section. Or let's say she has many kids, she has 3 or 4 kids, let's say under the age of 5. Right, I think I had 4 kids under the age of 6. Maybe that explains a lot of things about me. But but in general, that is certainly something that is not going to be easy, right? So a woman says, okay, I had my 4th kid, I fulfill my obligation, no question. I want a little bit of a break. Now it's not so simple. Now the question is, going to say, doesn't have a woman have a choice? Okay, there are a lot of factors involved. One of them obviously is going to be psychological, right? One of them is going to be, physical, certainly on the physical body, right? But in general, there is a major issue. And that major issue is, the purpose of marriage is what is to have kids, right? That is the purpose. I heard of Noah Weinberg, of blessed memory, the head of Aish Torah, founded the yeshiva Aish Torah, and he asked somebody, he said, what's your greatest pleasure? So the person said, my greatest pleasure, my kids. He said, okay, what's the thing that gives you the most aggravation? So he says, my kids. So he said, okay, let's go to your greatest pleasure. He said, you said your greatest pleasure is kids. He said, that's wonderful. He said, well, how many kids do you have? And he said, 1. So Rabbi Weinberg said, 1 kid, what's the matter? Too much pleasure? Right? So people want to have kids in order to have have continuity, right? Next generation. They want to have someone visit them, when they die, etc. They want to have a remembrance, in this world. But a lot of people want to have them later, want to have them much more spread out. They want to live life. Life is, for them. Why person has a kid, for goodness sakes, can't go out, can't do the same things. You're sort of chained down over here. Your nights are not the same, all these different things. But, a woman does, obviously, most women want to have children, right? So now the question is, there is a Torah prohibition where the Torah tells me by two sons of Judah, that they spilled seed and God killed them, right? So you see, even seemingly by non-Jews, because they weren't Jewish, right? Certainly the sons of Yehuda at this point in history, right? They weren't Jewish. Even if you tell me the sons of Jacob kept the entire Torah before it was given, right? Whatever that means. Here you see this is forbidden, right? Not only is it forbidden, right? Seemingly it's death penalty, right? A death penalty over here. So that would make sense. Okay, so on the books for Jews, right? That's not allowed. So what about non-Jews? Now we're going to try and keep this a little bit PG-13, right? But what about non-Jews, right? So you see over here by non-Jews, also not a good thing, right? Seemingly also not a good thing. So what's the issue with contraception? The issue is that you're spilling seed, right? You're wasting seed over here because a woman's not gonna get pregnant over here, right? 99% of the time they're using good enough things. A woman's not gonna get pregnant, right? Now there's gonna be another issue, right? What's the other issue? What if a woman is pregnant, right? If a woman is pregnant, most likely she's not gonna get pregnant again. She's not gonna have twins, right? It's just not gonna happen. So therefore, within those 9 months, right? Within those 9 months, husband's with his wife. She's not going to be forbidden to him, right? She's already pregnant, so maybe that's spilling seed also. Maybe that's forbidden, right? Maybe the Torah's going to say, that's going to be forbidden as well. That's not true, right? That in other words, if it's in the normal way and nothing's being stopped, right? In other words, sperm's not being stopped over here, then it's permissible, right? That would be permissible, right? There is an issue. Right, there is going to be an issue with certain contraceptives that stop the flow, right? A condom would be forbidden, right? That stops the flow, right? Obviously, finishing outside, that would be forbidden, right? But there are plenty of things that are permitted. The rabbis permit, let's say, an IUD or a diaphragm, or let's say even using spermicide. But even if a person only use spermicide, you can also get pregnant. Right, it's also a possibility. Right, I know a few people like that. They use spermicide, and the wife got pregnant. It's not foolproof, right? But people use that as well. And as long as it's something that does not stop the natural flow, then that is going to be permitted. If in general a person gets permission in order to use it. Now, why would they use these other things? Why not just go on the pill, right? The pill has side effects, right? They definitely have side effects. They're spotting from the pill. There's other side effects. Some people don't like to use it, so there are other forms, right? Some have different side effects, whatever, right? So in general, there are things there is contraception that will be permitted. But we're not going to say across the board, a woman says, well, I can't handle it and whatever. It has to be evaluated, right? It's not just, okay, I'm going to find permissibility to do this. A person has to sit down, speak to the rabbi, whoever it is, discuss the issue, all the different issues, and that's it. It's not just, I'm having a hard time and that's it. It has to be evaluated. Right. The reason it has to be evaluated and say, if a woman's got so many kids and she can't handle it, why don't you just give a blanket permissibility? First of all, that's not how Torah works. You got to take each case individually. You have to see where they're coming from, what they're going through, and all that. But there's another issue, right? There's another major issue. And the major issue is, even if you permit it, what about wasting seed? Why isn't that a problem of wasting seed? That's the issue. Right, that is the issue. So if you get rid of the first issue, meaning that it is going to be permissible, let's say go to the rabbi, speak to him, tell all the scenarios, and the rabbi says, okay, 6 months, give you 6 months, we'll evaluate after 6 months, we'll see where it goes, etc. So once that permissibility is given, then it doesn't mean it's a free for all. Right, what it means is, okay, now you have to decide, what you're going to use, and that thing has to be that thing has to be approved, right? It has to be permitted. So anything that is going to stop the flow is going to be forbidden, right? 100% is going to be forbidden. So procreation in general, certainly for Jews, is going to be only permitted between husband and wife, right? Once they're married under the chuppah, under the canopy, right? What is the blessing that the rabbi, one of the blessings, the first blessing that the rabbi will make underneath the canopy? The first blessing will be that he's permitted to his wife and she's forbidden to any other man, right? In other words, they're consecrated together, right? They're two peas in a pod, I guess we'll call it like that, right? In other words, they're consecrated together, and obviously adultery, one of the 10 commandments, obviously that's going to be forbidden, right? So therefore, having children or being intimate is only going to be when a person's married, right? This is what some people can't understand. They'll say, well, you only met 6 times, 8 times, or whatever, and they spoke a lot. Whatever the case is, how do you know it's the right one, right? How can you be so sure? You got to try things out, got to live together, and it's interesting that people live together and then they get married. The divorce rate in general is over 50%, right? I think it's about 60%. But the divorce rate for somebody that lives together first and then they get married, I think it's even over 70%. I think it's like 75%. They live together for years and years. All of a sudden, now they got a piece of paper that makes it legal. I guess, it takes all the fun out of it. That's why it's such a high divorce rate. But regardless, Jews are not allowed. They're not allowed to touch, not allowed to be intimate, right, until after marriage. So therefore, having children, right, is going to happen after marriage. So when we're talking about procreation and permissibility over here, then there are going to be certain things that are going to be forbidden, right? For example, you go to the book of Leviticus chapter 18, verse 20, 21, 22, right? Speaks over there about homosexuality. Homosexuality we've spoken about, right? That is absolutely forbidden. And we learn out homosexuality. We learn out bestiality. Now, it's interesting the Torah says bestiality is also forbidden. You think, oh, these rabbis are square. What do they know about the world? Well, way back when, that was also an issue, right? Anything went in Rome, right? Be like the Romans. Crazy things went on there. They weren't living in Victorian England. They were certainly promiscuous, no question about it. So, also, lesbianism is going to be forbidden also, even though it's not written explicitly in the Torah, right? Where do we learn it out from? We learn it out from a verse in Leviticus, chapter 18, verse 3. You can look it up. It says, do not perform the practice of the land of Egypt, in which you dwelled. Do not perform the practice of the land of Canaan, to which I bring you. Do not follow their traditions. Right? So now, what was so bad? What was so bad about the land of Egypt? We know the land of Egypt was steeped in 100% immorality. Right? One of the most immoral places in the history of man. Unfortunately, that's where the Jewish people were sent, right? So God says over here, this is not what I want you to do, right? So the rabbis explain that some of these practices of what they did was lesbianism. It's rabbinic. It's not in the Torah. That is true, right? That I won't disagree. The Karaite, might be a little bit upset, saying, oh, look, it's oral law. You're right. It's oral law, right? It's forbidden. Nonetheless, certainly for Jews, it should be forbidden, right? For non-Jews, probably should be forbidden as well. Why? Because women should have children. Women have an obligation there's an obligation to populate the world, right? And okay, a woman doesn't necessarily need a husband, right? Necessarily, but she has to do her part. Having a child or two or whatever, they can, for contraception by a non-Jew, right? We're gonna say they can. They want to have 1 kid, they want to have 2 kids, they want to spread it out over 5 years, 10 years. Okay, they're not obligated to have so many kids, but they're obligated to populate the world. That they have an absolute obligation. And if a person didn't do it, okay, right? It's like a mitzvah I didn't do. Today I have an obligation to put on tefillin. If I didn't put on tefillin, phylacteries, whatever they are, okay, you don't get the mitzvah. right? You don't get the mitzvah. Rabbeinu Yonah there just says, I'll just point out as a side point, Rabbeinu Yonah says any positive command, like wear tefillin, eat matzah, all these positive commands depend on resurrection of the dead. You're going to say, oh, what's the big deal? So what if so I didn't do it. I was lazy. It was too late. I overslept. Whatever the case is, right? But every positive command has a place in resurrection of the dead. That's how severe it is. So the person can't say, oh, big deal, I didn't do it. Yeah, what about resurrection of the dead? Right? That's a pretty serious thing. That's what Rabbeinu Yonah brings down the gates of repentance in Shari Tshuva. So as we mentioned, non-Jews certainly have an obligation to populate the world. But again, they don't have to have a boy or a girl, right? They have two girls, a boy, whatever, right? They don't have that obligation. But they have a mitzvah to have children, right? To populate the world. Also, contraception for a Noahide also shouldn't necessarily be an issue, right? Even though maybe we'll say spilling seed is forbidden, right? Certainly even for non-Jews, right? But over here, maybe we'll say that they should only use certain contraceptive things that, again, as we mentioned, that is not going to stop the flow, right? In other words, they can wait as long as they want, not to have kids, but they should use something that's not going to stop the flow over here. Yeah. So in any of these cases, there is one issue that that comes up, as we mentioned, and that is going to be what about premarital sex for a Noahide, right? Does that really apply? Now, technically, if it's not a forbidden relationship, the Rambam and others bring down, right, a whole list of people that non-Jews are not allowed to be with, right? So if this person is permitted to them, right, so technically that should be an issue, right? Forget about when Harry met Sally. That shouldn't necessarily be an issue, right? But I would say, as we mentioned many times by the Noahide laws, they're obligated to something that makes logical sense, right? Logical sense according to the Torah. But there may be a whole laundry list of things they're obligated in. Why? Because it's a moral imperative. Right? Now, people will say, come on, people hold hands, they do this, they do that, even from very young ages. Well, no one says that's necessarily a good thing. Right? Definitely not, we're not going to say, it's a good thing. But, a person's going to say that's the way of the world, is what people do. What's the big deal? And, they're doing it willingly, and it's consent and all that. That doesn't matter. Right? We're looking at it in the eyes of the Torah. So maybe you tell me 100% there's no issue, right? Maybe 100% there's absolutely no issue. Should be permitted for a non-Jew. Let them have a good time, whatever it is. Bottom line is, what about a moral imperative, right? There is such a thing, and it's not a small thing. There is such a thing about a moral imperative that, even though it's not part of the Noahide laws, and we spoke about this before, right? It is something to keep in mind. And, it is not something like, oh, it's a moral imperative, big deal. Moral imperative is pretty important, right? It can keep a person on the straight and narrow path or not, right? So there are many things that could apply to that. So that is what I would basically say about, about marriage, about contraception, how it applies to a Jew and a non-Jew. And now we'll sort of segue about animals, right? What about, we talked about contraception. Can a person neuter an animal? Or could a human neuter themselves? If it's not, let's say, something dangerous. But even before we get there, we'll have a little bit of a prelude here, because there is a major, major question, guarantee over here is going to ruffle some feathers. And the question's going to be, is it permissible to have animals in general? You're going to say, what's the issue? Why should it be forbidden to have an animal, to have a dog, right? To have a cat. You won't have cats in this country because they're tougher than dogs. They live in the trash. They are nasty animals in this country, right? But, dogs, why would it be an issue at all to have a dog, right? So now, in halachic literature, it seemed to have been common practice, certainly among Ashkenazic Jews, right, over the past several centuries, to have non-farm animals. I.e., what are non-farm animals? Dogs, cats, right, etc. Right? Seemingly, that was a common practice. Now, there has been a discussion debating whether that is really permissible or not, right? The question is going to be, okay, people do it. The question is it okay? Is it something that's permissible, or they're just doing it? They're doing it on their own. So the problem is that the Talmud already speaks this out, and the Talmud has two contradictory texts, two texts that are totally opposite. They're diametrically opposed. There's one text, Talmud says, anyone wants to look it up, Baba Kama 15b, cites in the name of Rabbi Nosson, that he says, someone who raises an evil dog, right? That, a dog over here is crucial. An evil dog, right, is going to be crucial what the definition is. But he states that if you have an evil dog in your home, you violate a Torah prohibition. What's the Torah prohibition? Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 8. The Torah says, don't place blood in your home. Now, what does that mean exactly? The implication is that it's permissible to raise a dog in a person's home, provided he is not an evil dog, right? Now, the question is, what's my definition? What's my definition of an evil dog? According to another rabbi, Rabbi Ishmael, he permits one to raise a type of dog known as a kofri or a kufri type of dog. Rashi says, what type of dog is that? It's either a small dog or it's a large hunting dog, right? And large hunting dogs don't do any harm. Why? What do large hunting dogs do? According to this, they help eliminate rodents and other animals, right? That's another place in Talmud explains that. Okay, so now what do we have? I get on the one hand, I'm not allowed to have an evil dog, right, in my possession. On the other hand, comes on the Talmud in the same tractate, Baba Kama 79b, writes that it's forbidden to own a dog unless it's securely chained. It has to be chained so it's not going to cause any damage, nor frighten anyone with its bark. Right? Now over here, right, the rabbis are telling you there's a curse as well, someone who owns dogs in general. Right? So now that would seem to apply to all dogs. So the question's going to be, okay, is it talking about, an evil dog, right, that's going to cause damage, right? Or is it talking about a dog that even could cause damage but is chained, right? It's going to be securely chained, right? Comes on the Rambam. The Rambam over here says that to raise any dog is forbidden unless it's tied up. Why? Because dogs frequently cause considerable damage. Now, I grew up with a poodle, a small poodle. This poodle, okay, sharp teeth, but what damage is this poodle going to cause? It's going to sit there and rip up someone's sofa, maybe, right? Maybe, but in general, maybe you're talking about bigger dogs, right? That certainly, if they're not chained up, they will cause damage, right? They do cause damage in general. So, comes on the Rambam, and according to what Rabbi Ishmael said, right, it's contradicted by the Mishnah and the Gemara and Baba Kama 79b and 83a, respectively, but Rabbi Ishmael over here says he's the sole authority who permits raising these type of dogs, these kufri type of dogs, right? That again is going to be a dog that is either a large hunting dog, doesn't do any harm, or a small dog. Now remember, there's an issue as well that dogs, they don't just damage by ripping things to shreds. They damage by frightening people, right? They frighten somebody with their bark, right? What's the issue? Talmud brings down a few cases where two women were totally frightened out of their wits by this dog's barking, right? Or two different dogs barking, and they miscarried, right? So there's another issue, right? There's an issue of either barking, right? Barking too loud, or there's an issue with biting, or both, right? The question is one or the other. We're going to see. So most early commentaries go against the Rambam, they throw the Rambam out over here. And where's the limitation? The limitation is only by evil dogs. It's only a dog that is evil over here, right? That's the limit. Comes along the code of Jewish law, the Shulchan Aruch, and rules according to that. That the prohibition is only going to be on a dog that is evil, right? And the later commentaries accept that opinion, right? Seemingly, that would be the way that we hold. But there's only one problem. The problem is, what is exactly an evil dog, right? How am I going to define it, right? So Rashi says, as we mentioned, right, that it's only going to be a dog that has to be chained, right? It has to be chained, right? Because what can this dog do, or what will this dog do? It will bite and it will bark. Therefore, what's the issue? The issue is it'll cause a pregnant woman to miscarriage. Now, Rashi over here, interesting enough, we can interpret it one of two ways, right? He uses the Hebrew letter Vav. What does the Hebrew letter Vav mean? It means and it can also mean or, right? Depending on the context, right? Everything, as we always say, is context. So if you go the first possibility, that an evil dog is one that both bites and barks, right? It has to do both. If it does one or the other, not good enough. But the second possibility is it does one or the other. In other words, I could be more stringent here. If it bites but it doesn't bark, or if it barks and it doesn't bite. I have to drink some wine over here. It's going to be fun trying to say that 3 times. If it bites or barks, one or the other, right? That's enough. But the first opinion says it has to do both, right? The first opinion is more lenient. Second opinion is more stringent. So comes along one of the great later commentaries of Shlomo Luria, and he brings down on this piece of Talmud, and he brings down and he says, he goes according to the second opinion, right? Second possibility, and that a dog is considered evil. Why? If it barks, because it scares people. It can make women miscarry, even if it doesn't bite. And again, that's the reason, right? The reason is because we're afraid that, there'll be a pregnant woman there, and she'll be totally terrified, and she'll miscarry, right? Which is a, it's not so far-fetched, right? This is a real possibility. So he would agree, Rav Shlomo Luria over here would agree that what dogs then would be permissible. The dogs that Rabbi Yishmael talked about, they don't cause harm, right? They don't cause damage. Those are the ones that are permitted. Every other dog should be forbidden, right? But again, most dogs bark. They don't necessarily bite, right? Not all dogs certainly going to bite, but a lot of dogs bark, right? So that would eliminate like 98% of all dogs. How many dogs don't bite? I don't know. Probably not too many. So I can understand that it should be permitted to have these dogs even if they bark. Because if they bark, their bark is not that strong. Since it's not that strong, it's not going to be that harmful, right? So since people are aware these dogs are not harmful, right? So now they don't fear them, right? They're not going to fear them, and that should be okay. Now, there is one caveat, right? The caveat with what Rabbi Luria says is his ruling is that, quote, God-fearing individuals. And he concludes his discussion by saying, we have to excuse the Jewish people, i.e., those who own dogs which bark but do not bite. Right? But praised is one is careful to limit his ownership to only this kufri type of dog, right, that does not scare people, right, and does not cause damage. And blessing should be conferred upon him. That's the quote, right? Pretty nasty, right? You own a dog, and that dog barks, but it doesn't bite. So according to Rav Shlomo Luria, it's like you're a loser over here. It's forbidden, right? Someone who's God, that means you're not God-fearing, right? That's what he's saying. You are not God-fearing because you have this dog that barks, right? So according to this, there would be some halachic justification for Jews who own dogs that bark but don't bite, right? That would seem, we could say that would be permissible, right? Even what Rashi said, an evil dog has to do both. They have to bite and bark, But if you have a dog that only barks but it frightens women, that is going to be forbidden, right? That 100% is going to be forbidden. So there's another exception, right? As we're going through here, comes along with Yaakov Emden, right? One of the great rabbis more than 100 years ago, 150 years ago. He has a further restriction, and he writes, one's permitted to own a dog. A dog as a pet, it's a waste of time. Now, people would argue, very therapeutic. Let's say someone lives by themselves. It's companionship. I get it, right? But he's saying it's a waste of time. Nonetheless, according to Rabbi Emden, he doesn't bring any sources to support his opinion, right? And seemingly it's a minority opinion. So everyone can relax. And even though it's a minority opinion, it doesn't really bring any sources, right? It is a minority opinion, right? But I did want to point out that he says if it serves no purpose, then it's a waste of time. Now I'm going to say, what about companionship? No, I'm going to say companionship is not important, right? For a lot of people, companionship is important. So maybe even according to him, that serves a purpose, right? That serves a proper purpose, but in other situations, maybe that wouldn't be the case. Now, the Code of Jewish Law and most authorities, again, are going to limit the prohibition to an evil dog. So what does that mean? That the implication would be I can own a dog for any reason, as long as it's not evil. Whether it doesn't bark or bite or both, or as long as it does not fulfill the obligation as being an evil dog, then that would be okay. Right, that we know that Jews used, various animals for recreational purposes. Right, Talmud and Tractate Shabbat 90b relate to children used to play with certain type of locust. I guess that was what they had fun in their day. Right, Talmud in Baba Batra 28 tells of a certain type of bird known as a kalanita, which was used by children to play with. So you see that kids played with certain type of animals. So, therefore, it couldn't have been a prohibition across the board, right? Remember, what is the case talking about? The case is talking about dogs, evil dogs, right? Other animals, okay, if they would fulfill that criteria, be dangerous, this, that, okay, that'd be something else, right? But some of the commentaries say it's only about dogs. It's not about other animals. I mean, I don't think a person's going to have a pet alligator, right? Or I know someone that had actually, he had piranhas, right? He had piranhas. He once put 2 Siamese fighting fish in the tank with a piranha, right? And with a piranha. What was left? A piranha. I guess he had dinner, whatever. But, that should only apply, again, to dogs. So what do we see over here? So we see that there's no objection seemingly to keeping animals for enjoyment, right? Which goes against what Rav Yaakov Emden said. But what would he respond? Right? He said these passages don't discuss dogs. They're discussing other things. Right? He's talking about a dog as a pet. Right? But owning a parakeet, right? Owning other, a hamster, something like that, maybe that's not a problem. Right? Or a rabbit, right? But these are non-kosher animals. I know someone asked my Rebbe about this, about having rabbits, and he said it's allowed, just keep them outside the house. You shouldn't bring them inside the house. Right, the whole thing, the whole thing about having, non-kosher animals, in your house or, whatever. But interesting enough, in ultra-Orthodox homes today, you won't see them have dogs. In modern Orthodox, places, you will see people have dogs. Maybe they have other pets, etc. Right? So, it seems that in the ultra-Orthodox community, we're going to be much more strict. Right? We're going to be much more strict. And what do you need a non-kosher animal in? in your house. You tell me companionship, this, that. Some people need it, okay? Right? I'm not going to argue that, right? But, in ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods, you don't see them. You don't see them. When I lived in Chile, every house had a dog. They didn't have kids, but every house had at least one dog, right? So over here, the discussion is about dogs, right? It could also apply to ownership of other animals, because the code of Jewish law and Shulchan Aruch rules the person can kill an evil cat, that harms children. And again, people here are terrified of cats. There are people that are just, totally scared of cats. So again, what's the issue? The issue is an evil animal. So if the animal's not evil, doesn't fit that criteria, very good. Then it doesn't pose a problem, right? There are other issues with pets. I just, throw out, a few. Then we'll get to, the last part here. Person has to feed his pet before he feeds himself, right? Some may not necessarily be aware of that. There's a verse in Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 15. It says, I'll give you grass in your fields for your animal, and you shall eat and be satisfied, right? Now, why does it say that? Grass in your field for your animal, he comes first, and then you shall eat, right? That's how the commentaries learn. So you feed your animal first, and then you feed yourself, right? The question, though, is that obligatory, or is that just what we call going beyond the essential requirements of Torah law? What we call midas chasidus. You're going beyond the requirement of the law. Or maybe that's my obligation, right? It comes on the Rambam, gives two examples of exemplary conduct that are not required by law, right? First one is the early sages fed their slaves, same type of food they ate themselves. The early sages fed their slaves and animals, second thing, before they fed themselves. So it's clear according to the Rambam that it's recognized as a recommended behavior, but not required by the letter of the law. Other sources say no. Other sources say totally forbidden. It's a total prohibition if you eat before your animal, right? 100% a total prohibition, and whatever, difference of opinion. Also not allowed to feed your dog a mixture of milk and meat, right? In other words, dogs have to eat kosher dog food. Doesn't have to be kosher meat, right? But it cannot be a mixture of meat and milk. That is forbidden, and therefore I can't even feed it to my dog. Right? There are 3 times the Torah says don't cook a calf in its mother's milk. One of the reasons is to show that it's forbidden for me to get benefit. Feeding an animal with a forbidden mixture of milk and meat makes it forbidden, right? Makes it forbidden because I'm getting benefit. My animal over here is getting benefit. And your pet also has to be kosher for Passover, right? You can't feed him chametz, right? Your dog, cat, whatever, right? You can't feed him chametz. You can't even instruct an on-Jew to do that, right? So, he's got to be kosher, all the way through. You can't own chametz, you can't feed it to your dog, right? And if you have dog food that has chametz in it, right, you have to get rid of it. You have to sell it, right? Or you can just put it away, unless it's real, chametz, etc. So that is really the issue about having dogs, which I think most people are going to be a little bit shocked by. But now to really the meat and potatoes here, and that is, is it permissible to remove a reproductive organ from a human or an animal, right? Whether male or female. Now I remember many years ago when I was first in yeshiva, so a rabbi of mine had a dog. And whatever, I went to see him, and the dog's jumping all over me, and so I said, I want to get this thing fixed, and he said, I wish I could, but it's forbidden, right? That was my first inkling to anything, that this might actually be an issue. So there is a debate, there is an issue whether removal, of a woman's womb, right, constitutes a biblical or rabbinic prohibition, right? If a woman has cancer or whatever and it has to be removed, it has to be removed, right? But the question is, what's the status? Is it a Torah prohibition or is it a rabbinical prohibition? The Talmud itself, Sanhedrin 56b, anyone can look it up, records the dispute whether the Talmud itself whether the Torah itself forbids non-Jews to remove reproductive organs, even from animals not owned by a Jew. Could they take out or neuter an animal, let's say better, their own animal or another non-Jew's animal? There's a whole discussion, right? There's a whole discussion. So the question is what we do, right? So it seems one of the major commentaries in the Code of Jewish Law, the Beit Shmuel, in Even HaEzer, that's where these laws are. He rules that this controversy has not been resolved. We're not sure what to do, right? So you need somebody of stature to be able to consider the position and answer whether non-Jews are forbidden or not. On the other hand, comes on the Aruch HaShulchan, one of the great commentaries more than 100 years ago, and he rules in accordance that the majority, he goes according to the majority. What's the majority opinion according to him? Non-Jews not commanded. They're not commanded concerning this prohibition. So we got a difference between two opinions, whether it's forbidden on a biblical level, on a rabbinic level, to instruct a non-Jew to remove the productive organs of an animal. We're going to get to humans in a second, right? So if non-Jews are included in the command, then even if a Jew wanted a non-Jew to do it, right? He wants his dog, to get spaded, or female dog get neutered, whatever it is, then I'm not allowed to tell a non-Jew to do it if it's forbidden, right? Why? Because you're putting the stumbling block in front of him. That's Leviticus chapter 19, verse 14, right? Don't put a stumbling block in front of the blind. So the question is, if it's really forbidden for a non-Jew, for a Jew, nothing to talk about is forbidden. So you might say, okay, let me give it to a non-Jew. But if the non-Jews really command it, right, even on a rabbinic level, it's going to be forbidden. I can't let him do it. Why can't I let him do it? Putting a stumbling block, right? That is going to be forbidden. You are encouraging, putting a stumbling block means I'm encouraging and enabling someone else to sin. For example, if someone took the Nazirite vow, which you can't do today, because we don't have a temple, you can't bring sacrifices and all that, but someone made a Nazirite vow, right? He sits down at my table, I can't put a bottle of wine in front of him. Even if it's forbidden for him to do it, I can't put a bottle of wine in front of him. Why? Because I'm enticing him. I'm putting the stumbling block. He could get wine from someone else. That's not the point. The point is he's by me. And if he's by me, I cannot do that. That is going to be forbidden. But on the other hand, if non-Jews over here are not included, then the prohibition is only instructing a non-Jew to remove this productive organ. Maybe it's just a general rabbinic prohibition. In other words, even if it's permitted for a non-Jew to do, maybe a Jew is still not allowed to tell him to do it, just as a general prohibition, that he shouldn't do it. He can't have a Jew do it. Even if it's permitted for a non-Jew, he still shouldn't do it, right? It's a general prohibition to act on the Jew's behalf, right? Because basically he's going to be a messenger for you, even though there's a whole discussion whether a non-Jew can actually be a messenger in Jewish law for a Jew or not. We're not going to go there, but in general, he's performing the act for you. Now you're going to say, okay, who cares? What's the practical difference over here? The practical difference is, am I allowed to instruct a non-Jewish veterinarian to remove an animal's reproductive organs? Now, here's the caveat: to alleviate the animal's suffering due to sickness. What if the animal's sick, right? And one of the things that's making it sicker is, it's the reproductive organs, cause it to be more aggressive, other things. So a person's not allowed to violate a biblical prohibition, even to alleviate the animal suffering, right? But it could be I'm allowed to violate a rabbinic prohibition to ask a non-Jew, because really maybe a non-Jew is not commanded. But that's only in a case where you're alleviating the suffering. I can't just do it because I don't want this animal to have, to have puppies, or to have kittens. I don't want to deal with this. 7, 8, 10, whatever. I don't want to have to deal with this.